Okay. Hello and thank you everyone for being here. Muchas gracias por venir aquí presencialmente también y que están con nosotros los ponentes que conectan desde Estados Unidos y de la India. So here we have also the speakers, the experts and practitioners of regenerative culture, connecting from the United States and India. Well, this is a hybrid format, so we have all the people in the room here. You'll be happy to know that a lot of people have come to watch you as well, presential here physically. But of course, we have many people connected and watching through the streaming online. So first of all, I wanted to thank the organizers, especially Distrito Natural and Triple, who have organized the event, and also all the sponsors that have made this event possible. So we're very happy to be here with you, and we're very grateful that you made the time to be here with us. I know it hasn't been easy with the time differences, especially between the US, which is very early in the morning, and India, which is quite late at night. So we're just here in the middle, and we appreciate that we managed to meet in the middle. I think we're going to start with a keynote speech by Carol Sanford. And then after we go into a debate that we're going to explore the kind of unlearning with Manish Jain, and also with Daniel Christian Wall. We'll be exploring the presence. How can we be present in the moment that we are at the moment to go through this regenerative transition that we feel that we so much need to be able to heal and address a lot of the societal challenges that we're facing. But also with Joel, I'm very much looking forward also to see some of the, with Joel Glansberg, to be able to explore the actual practice. You know, how do we put this into practice and see what examples of regenerative practice there are out there that we can refer to and we can be inspired by. I think this is mainly an inspirational and kind of a philosophical debate, but as many people are now saying, is that we're tired of talking and we want to get on with action because there's no more time to talk. No, we need to do things and make it real. So I open the floor to Carol. Please, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, because you can do it much better than I can. Especially, I think your work with indigenous wisdom, the connection with the land, the working with nature, and also the moving away from human-centered, which we thought was actually a progress, that we are being human-centered, but now we're becoming earth or nature or place-centered, you know, and actually looking at the ecosystem. And the way you explain it with the wisdom you had from your grandfather, who was, you know, a Native American himself, you know, from the roots of the ancestors, I think it's very interesting to explore how different that way of thinking is to the way we've been educated and our culture, because I was comparing that also with the way our organizations, our politics, our companies are organized today, and also the way we do things, this extractive way that you talk about as well, that we need to move away from. So how do we move beyond that way of thinking, even with the scientific enlightenment that so supposedly we thought we are enlightened? We now find ourselves again in this place where, to be honest, I wouldn't want to call it enlightenment at the moment, because I think we made a lot of progress, but I think we have a huge way to go. And I think that we made a lot of progress in atomic thinking, in going down to the molecules, and amazing technological progress. But I hope you can enlighten us on how to go back to this ecosystem thinking and connecting to ourselves, to our ancestors, to our roots, and being able to heal these problems we have.
I'm gonna back up a little bit and give an overview. I'm going to be talking about regeneration and how to know if that's where you are, and including culture. And you're going to have three assessment ideas and design factors for testing yourself. Uh, so, next slide. And I spoke to this already, that I transliterate, which means I don't literally translate from ancient wisdom, but from my how it passes through me, uh, and mostly directly from my grandfather, who was and grandmother, who were each half Mohawk. Uh, and of course, that happened when I was very young, and I was walking around in woods and farms and things with him. But I also decided to find teachers from wisdom lineages, uh, and particularly Sri Aurobindo and the mother from Tibetan with Lama Govinda. And then I was at Berkeley with several folks who had been there when David Bohm was teaching and doing his doctorate there. And so they became my teachers when I arrived, and some who had also studied with Krishnamurti, and his idea there should be no gurus. Uh, and so I have to say that I'm not an expert. I'm not a guru. I have a lot of ideas that I work on. And then my acupuncturist, who studied with the Dalai Lama's physician, has been one of my best friends for all the years I've lived in Seattle. So, next slide. All right. So I want to put you to work so that this is interactive for you. And the best way to do that is to ask you to look at your own uh, life and your work. And right now, make a couple of notes that you can use to test the ideas I'm going to give you in the next 15 minutes or so. What are your favorite ideas that you use in your practice? They may be models you use or ideas. Why would it matter for planetary and social reasons that we really know whether we're talking about regeneration or we missed the mark? We've been using other ideas, which are good ideas, but they're not about regeneration. So make a note to yourself that you can check and see if you're borrowing ideas from other theory based or other practices and calling them regeneration. Why would it matter? To me, it's a very big deal because I think regeneration can make so much difference. How, with the third question, how might our own egos prevent us from really finding the answers to the big question we're facing today, uh, of climate change, social inequity, economic inequity? Uh, and so I want you to hold those questions in your mind as I offer you these three ideas that I think will help you sort out whether you're really talking about regeneration. Next slide. Um, oh my gosh, this is so small I can't read it. Uh, there are two ways that are important. One is, oh, that's too big. Uh, oh my. All right, stop there. Uh, I make sure as much as I can, and I'm as frail as everyone else in collapsing out of a living system view. But the thing and the way I learned, and all those traditions I just mentioned, were from holding a living system at work. And that means you've got bears and uh, rivers and salmon and water moving, and all of those have work to do together. They're at work, and you have to be able to image it to see it. So if you're working requiring people to image and see something at work, you're likely in another paradigm or approach. I always ask, what's the value adding process that's going on here that's a dynamic in a specific system. Because if we have generic, you'll see in a minute, we've got a nature view, not a living system view. And each being in that system, that bear, has to be seen as whole. And I call it looking at a life shed view, not a watershed, because watershed is a nature view, uh, and it's about our water. So how do we double check that we're not in a nature view? Uh, if we're thinking that something is beautiful and a watershed, uh, we're really, or a river, or a part of something, or is our environment what humans live in, or we're objectifying it, looking at it as separate categories, like water, as though we were separate from a life shed. So the big issue is getting generic and fragmented. So give me the next slide. We'll say more about those two. Next slide. All right. So again, it's a little small. All right. If we have oops, you went forward. Uh, there are three things that's very helpful to stop, and three it's very helpful to start. Overall, you're not in regeneration unless you have a specific place. If you have abstract ideas about what regeneration is, you're not in regeneration because you have to have a particular watershed, or excuse me, a life shed, or a specific community, or something here, because regeneration only happens in specific places and times, uh, and circumstances. So if what you're thinking about is regeneration, you think it's the same everywhere, you're not working on regeneration. So you have to, the three things to stop and start. One of the things David Bohm, the great physicist, and I suggest you read his work if you're not already, is we work from fragments. We separate everything out just like we do a frog. We cut it up and pin names on its appendages and think we understand frog. You only understand frog jumping in an ecosystem where it's other frogs and fish and everything live together. So if we're fragmenting, we're not working with whole. And I always start with a life shed, because otherwise it's very hard to know where the whole begins. Uh, I work very hard to stop putting things in categories. Uh, so when people study watershed management, you learn there are five types of watersheds, and that's categorizing. So if your practices have categories, and then everything is generic to all that are in that category, or maybe all categories, you're not in regeneration, culture, or any other way. What you will see if you're really paying attention, regeneration is every living system has an essence. You, each of you in the room or online, have an essence, that is singular, that is who you are. And if everything else were taken away, you couldn't take that away and still be you. So we start with, when we're working, and Joel maybe mentioned more about how he does it, because I think knowing about the story of a place is a way to understand its essence and avoid categorizing. So if any of your practices have things that are divided up, put in categories, given generic names and ways to work on, you're not in regeneration. You can only regenerate from holes. And the last thing is, if you fall into problem solving, you're not in regeneration. You have to start from not the problem, but the potential of something. And the potential comes from its essence. So if you have practices in your work that fall into any of these three stop exercises, I suggest you do some digging. I've written a lot about this, and you can't cover everything in 20 minutes, but these three top stops and starts will help. Next slide. All right. So I put them into a context to remind you that this one slide to me covers most of the key things to remember when we're working on being regenerative. We want to be in a living system view. If you hear yourself talking about nature, it's normally more fixed. It's generic. It's we can't see it at work. The key here is to get ourselves into a living system mind. Now, to do that, you have to go to always to a specific place, a specific entity. Uh, Anytime you see research that said this is out of all people, how they all work, like neuroscience research, all that's doesn't. It's not about regeneration. So you always have a living specific place. You always make sure you avoid not just doing the fix and growth ideas, but moving into development of all these things based on their essence. Uh, and that picture, I think, holds it. Go to the next slide, please. All right. So here's how I source and why. Um, for me, I have to be able to vet it and validate it for myself, not trust the experts. I think the expert idea came about with behaviorism, and I have a new book coming out about how behaviorism uh, has really taken us away from understanding the living system. So I only work with lineages which are at least 100 years old. And are living still. I avoid pop psychology, I avoid neuroscience and scientific method because all of those are mechanisms to fragment, to categorize, and to make generic. Uh, and so if other people are doing it for me, I'm not working on it myself. And so I avoid all the things that are the others vetting it for me. Uh, let's go to the last slide. All right. This is just so if you want more resources and if you would like a copy of these slides, you can certainly send me an email at carol@carolsanford.com, or you can follow any of these directions that are all free. And well, I guess you have to buy books, but most of these sources are free to kind of follow up on these ideas. So I think I've managed to recover the time, and maybe the panel can take over now.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you very much, Carol, for spending your time and energy in this time and first thing in the morning. I think that sorry about the technological problems. I think we are cruising now, so we can get into the conversation. I'm just gonna, okay, so I think that what Carol actually framed for us, I mean, for example, Theory U itself and all these methodologies, I agree they are very limited in terms of the full essence of the regenerative culture, for example, that you're talking about. But sometimes they've been helping us move into the direction for, I think, some of the people who need some guidance into like this unlearning process or trying to get into the essence of the presence of feeling where they are and where we're going to go, or doing this collectively together. But anyway, the way I wanted to frame this conversation was because of Manish's work on, I was quite impressed with what Manish said about having to unlearn a lot that he's learned in his university at, Browns and Berkeley, was it? No, that you went to? that with a degree in economics, in political psychology, and in education, that you then felt that you had to unlearn a whole lot of things, to get to where you are now and do this kind of regenerative practice. So I'm also looking at what Carol put there about the fragmentation and looking at potential and solutions instead of problems, or looking at um, the whole and the essence. But it's so different to the way we organize ourselves today, and the way we practice today in our business, in our organizations, in our politics. So how do you think we can unlearn together and move to this essence thinking that Carol just described to us, and actually feel our way through these problems that we have, we're facing together? So
Would you
Manish,
like,
maybe you
like
can
to start?
start.
Okay. Salam, namaste, everyone. My name is Manish. I live in Rajasthan, India, in a very magical place called Udaipur. Um, and Carol started with some of her lineage, so I'll also share where much of my lineage has come from. First, I've been very much inspired by the Jain spiritual tradition, also Gandhi, Tagore, um, um, probably very deeply by my so-called illiterate village grandmother, who I later realized was more intelligent than my Harvard professors, and by the land of Mewar, and every day by my 21-year-old daughter, who has been unschooled. She's never been to school, never looked at a textbook or exam in her life, and is genuinely what I feel a regenerative, holistic being. She hasn't been damaged by many things in the system. So I learn and unlearn with her every day. And I was very happy to see Krishnamurti and Aurobindo on your list also, Carol. They're also very inspiring for me. And some of the ideas around unlearning come from Krishnamurti's ideas on deconditioning and things. So, and last, I would say Ivan Illich has also been quite a mentor in many of my ideas. So I think what I would just start off with, I work with a lot of people in education, and what I have been sharing with them is the way that we have been trained to think about the crisis as part of the crisis. So I think what you beautifully highlighted were some elements of that, and starting with our notion of self. Um, so one of the things I learned when I thought about myself, I would always think of this individual here. And what my grandmother helped me to see, when I asked her, "Who are you?" she would at least rattle off 200 names, all of our relations, our animals, the mountains, the river, the lake near us. So my what I felt was like I had been modernized into a very anemic notion of self. And I think that's where this part of our work, and Gandhi used the term Swaraj. Swaraj is Swa is self, and Raj actually has many meanings: rule over, mastery. But I like the word harmony, harmony of the self. And this expansive self is I think the unlearning helps us open up the window to that expansive self. Um, and much of our thinking, as you mentioned, by what I call factory schooling, has been made. Uh, we've been put in this fragmented, mechanistic, linear, reductionist scarcity mindset, or what I call also the monoculture of the mind. And so, unless we face this crisis more deeply, we uh, probably will not only reproduce the systems we have, but we will make things much worse. There's a term that Illich I like to use, iatrogenic. So you try to solve one thing, it creates 10 more problems.
Yeah.
So that's what we're kind of trapped in. I was just again reading something on the whole, energy transitions that are being tried under climate change, for example. So again, solar, wind, opening up, hundreds of other challenges when you try to build it on massive scale on those systems. So what I wanted to show is there was one slide I had. Did you guys get it in the WhatsApp? Can you put that up? So just so we have in India a very deep tradition of goddesses. We have millions of gods, but the three main goddesses, I think, are my reference points or my compass for unlearning. And so one is, there's a photo. I don't know. Is there a photo with you, Sharam? Can you put that up? Of the three goddesses, and when I talk about it. So one is this notion of Lakshmi. Lakshmi, I think, represents wealth. So our notion of wealth, I think, is the starting point where I would start to unlearn. What is real wealth? I think she's asking us to think. And the money, we've been told money system, GNP, all of these things are wealth. And we spend most of our lives chasing after these. And I think that if we want to build a regenerative culture, we have to have a much more expansive idea of wealth and our relationship to wealth outside of this fake wealth, this private ownerships. And how do we move our notions of wealth back into gift culture and the commons, and understand that is the source of our health, whether it's our health, our social relationships, our relationships with the more than human beings. So I would say one is that is our notion of wealth, and the notion of wealth we have right now with money system perpetually reproduces scarcity. So even the people I know who are deeply into regenerative game are oftentimes get stuck, in a scarcity mindset and reproducing. And I think it's this dependency on a certain limited, narrow notion of wealth that keeps reproducing itself. And I've been tested many times by what I call the goddess of the gift. And sometimes, my wife has to shake me when I go into this trance again of scarcity. And she starts reminding, no, when you're facing scarcity, the solution is not to match scarcity with scarcity, but to match scarcity with love and abundance and generosity. And then that's how you grow things. And the second thing I wanted to say was with Saraswati, our notion of knowledge. So we are privileging today schools and experts over community and the more than human being. We're privileging texts and exams over real life experiences. We're privileging the head over the heart, the hands, and the intelligence of our homes. We're privileging copyright over copyleft. So I think that many of our notions of knowledge also, we have to really look deeply into them, and knowledge and education. And there's that's what I would offer as a second reference point. And also this fear, like I find so many people who have been school educated all the time saying we don't know enough. We have to study more before we understand things. And I think that reading more books doesn't deepen our understanding. The sources are start when we maybe start trusting ourselves a bit more, trusting our intuition, trusting our communities. And the third I would say is where Shakti is the third goddess, and our notions of power. So our notions of power are much grounded in force and scale. Today, everything is being driven by this idea. Is the idea scalable? Is the question before it's dismissed, right? And so our notions of power, I think we have to question, and that power is very much around competition. It's around domination. And those are, it's even around, comparison. Even as a parent, when my child was growing up, I can feel the very deep wounds of comparison. And I have to catch myself sometimes around that, which are so deeply in us. So, and in that notion of power, we feel that we are alone. This is where the crux of the unlearning happens. We've forgotten how to trust. We've been told, don't trust your neighbors, or everyone is out to screw you if you trust them. And I think this is where a very deep unlearning for my own journey over the last 25 years has really been to expand this field of trust as part of the way forward. The last thing I'll offer right now is that I think also with power is the kind of ideological categories we've been trained in. So I think this is what you're referring to: left and right, good and bad, all of these categories, which actually keep us at a very superficial level, and we're not able to move beyond and see something, connect to something much deeper. So I think part of the unlearning for me is even these categories. So many triggers, like I see it in the West, I see it in India. Somebody says one word and it's triggering and triggers violence. And so I think that how do we actually see those triggers, start to transcend those triggers, heal those triggers, is another part of the unlearning journey. And I guess the last thing, I wrote something for my daughter a while back, which was on paradox. So I think that the times we live in call us to be able to live in paradox. Many of my friends and I, we talk about the trickster paradigm, the trickster archetype. And the trickster archetype allows us to be in paradox, I think, blur things a bit more, be much more playful about how we approach things. So I think this being able to unlearn so that we can sit with the paradoxes and not be paralyzed with the paradoxes is part of the way forward. And even maybe appreciate the paradoxes and the chaos that comes with and invite that is part of the way forward, rather than to fear, because again, the fear and control mindsets that we have are, I think, preventing us from accessing many other possibilities and potentials we have. So I think I will just end there and invite the other two colleagues here, Daniel and Joel, if you guys want to also comment on this.
Could just wanted to add, because for Daniel also goes in about how this unlearning process, I was looking into it, and some 5,000 years ago, I feel that there was this dismantling of, like you showed the three goddesses, and they were actually women. And we know that a lot of the women goddesses in our ancestry were demoted, so that they were then giving us stories about how the woman comes from the man, and the only way that, and the hierarchy, and how the power of man went up in the hierarchy, and the subjugation of women became, actually in the algorithm, it was put as the woman being lower than the man, no, in the hierarchy. And that whole process of also the way land expansion and what you're saying about the military expansion and everything that came after that, the empire. So a lot of that has been built up over many, many years. And I think the reductionism gave us the possibility to be sitting here today, because all this technology has come thanks to that atomic view of the world, and the reductionism, and we can be sitting here talking in hybrid format, or all the technological advancements. But how do we recover that wisdom, or break down these hierarchies, the silos, and start looking at the whole again? I mean, I think that we are here for a reason. I guess this has all happened for a reason, maybe we say, because it's the history and there was no other way. But the question is now, in terms of, I think, Daniel's work as a consultant in regenerative transformation, as you have a consultancy firm, but you're also a researcher and educator, and of course, great practitioner in this. So how do you think, where are we in this transition from this monolithic, monoculture, top-down or hierarchical way that we've organized, that is principally male dominant? Because many ideas of feminines in the board of companies and in politics, they're actually acting exactly in the same way as if it was a man. So that idea of putting women in positions of power is also not changing the system. It's actually they're acting as if they were the men in that position sometimes. So how do we break all this down, into this regenerative practice, and how is it compatible with the way we operate today in this modern world? Oh, sorry, we are on mute, Daniel. It's a wide question.
So, well, particularly because the richness of what we already talked about is such that I'd rather respond to that. First of all, like, I'm a reluctant consultant because that's a label that people understand. I don't really do consultancy. If people are interested, help people question their perspective, very much along the lines of what Carol and Manish have been talking about. And shame that Carol seems to have disappeared, but I find everything she presented was highlighting really critical points about regeneration. The only thing where I would say that the triggering of, like Manish mentioning triggers, creating categories of nature versus living systems is maybe one particular way of how we understand nature. But if we understand ourselves as expressions of and participants in a living dynamic wholeness, then one way of understanding nature would be that process in and of itself. That is the living system. So I agree that a lot of people use the term nature in a very nature out there, particularly in the Spanish speaking world. Medio ambiente is something that is out there. But we can also reframe, like part of the unlearning is to give meaning to words that have had mistaken reductionist input into them. And so for me, nature is the larger process that we're an expression of. But actually, I prefer using the word life. And I think it's important to understand that life in and of itself is a fundamentally regenerative process. And as we've all referred to, in our indigenous lineage, we have been able to be regenerative expressions of place in most places around the planet. In our deep past of, in this physical form, Homo sapiens is around for about 300,000 years. So for around 290,000 years, most of us were in the mode of understanding ourselves as living expressions of the ecosystems we inhabited. We didn't think that we were the owners of these ecosystems, but we were dynamic participants in them, and we were capable of interacting with them in such a way that they became more abundant rather than less abundant. And you mentioned 5,000 years, something went wrong with our shift from matriarchy to patriarchy. That whole perspective of power over, that whole separation that for some people became this self and world being nature out there and self being separate in here, is part of what we're trying to overcome. But the only way we can overcome it is, coming back to what Manish is talking about, is to embrace the paradox that we are at one and the same time what we're looking at and what we're participating in, and we are the observer perspective on that process. And so we need to become a lot more aware of how our organizing ideas and our narratives already shape not just what we do, but how the world shows up for us. And for me, bringing people into that awareness and aligning people with the fundamental regenerative patterns of life, which in Janine Benyus's terms is life creates conditions conducive to life. And again, the paradox of the modern, like you mentioned theory U, and how that's on the one hand helping a lot of people to question their beliefs and kind of unfreeze their mental scaffolding to reconsider different ways of seeing and being. And I know a lot of people that have had good experiences with theory U, but the classic swing from the ego to the eco is the kind of view of nature as other, like it. Otto Schama and the whole crew of theory U like to frame everything in this shift from ego to eco. And to pick up again on Manish and the Vedanta as an expression of regenerative knowledge that is thousands of years old, the whole notion of seva, to me, resolves this ego to eco dualism into a triad where we can only express ourselves in service to life. And because we are life, being in service to life feeds us. And so the only way that we can express the uniqueness, who we are, and the essence of what we can bring to this process as an expression of life is in service to a greater whole. And we can get really stuck about terminology and pet theories and principles and all of that. But for me, anybody who really tries to align with this fundamental regenerative impulse of life itself and invite people into, just as Carol was saying, to not see the world through the lens, the taught lens of there are problems out there, there are meta crises, there are converging problems, and we need to find solution. That's all taking us into abstraction. As Carol was rightly pointing out, the only way we can meet the complexity we're nested in is through the specificity in front of us, through the unique context of our culture, our community, the places we're in. And because place is fractal, as Ben Haggard likes to point out, beautiful phrase, when we work on place, we work on the life shed or the bioregion, and we work on the planet. But we work through the uniqueness of everyone in front of us, and the same problems show up, but they don't show up as problems. They suddenly show up as potential, because we don't look at them as categories, but we look at them as a living, dynamic network that is actually all around us. So the whole notion that we always make in talking about how do we make the transition to regenerative cultures, that's the wrong question. Regeneration is all around us every day because it's a fundamentally living principle. What we need to do, and again, I'm borrowing my friends in Regenesis, we need to unveil that regeneration is going on everywhere. And we need to, in coming to the complexity view that Manish is also exploring, we need to, in this nested complexity that we're part of, understand that by making the system more aware of itself, seeing like different impulses in our locality that are already expressions of life creating conditions conducive to life, need to come together and form a place-sourced, unique story of that place and speak about that life itself is wanting us to recover our regenerative inheritance. And the last thing I'll say there is to pick up on Manish again, the monoculture of the mind. We have seen everything through the thinking mind. And I find Jung's 4 ways of knowing really useful here, because he says that we participate in the world through sensing, feeling, intuiting, and thinking. But right now, we seem to live in an artificial construct of our minds and only value thinking, when really our bodies are capable of so much more, of direct knowing in relationship with each other, with place, with other life forms. And being regenerative is also recovering these other 3 ways of knowing. And that's what all the unlearning is also about in my mind. But I'd love to hear Joel pick up on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here with all of you, and I'm loving everything I'm hearing people say. And the first thing that occurs to me is what I think we need to do is remember. And that I mean that in both ways that word is used, not just remember different ways of being and seeing, but see ourselves again as members of these larger wholes. And for me, that's really core to these ideas about regeneration, is not just seeing ourselves as a part of nature or the living world, but the thing that is so important, and you were pointing at this with the service piece, is that reflect on your own experience when you felt a part of something or apart from it. It was when you had an essential role to play in it that you really felt like you belonged. And I think that one of my experiences is, so doesn't matter how many times we say we're all a part of nature, we're all a part of life, until I can see a different story that, oh, what is the role that human beings evolved to play in ecosystems that the world would be worse without? That's what we need to remember. My indigenous friends here talk about remembering our original instructions, right? What did we co-evolve to do, instead of this story that we can only live by extracting from and using up the living world? And I wanted to tell 2 stories. that were very informative to me. So one was when my oldest son was a little boy. He was maybe 2 months old, and I was holding him as he slept. And I've built things my whole life. I've built houses and buildings and organizations and curricula and gardens. And so I was thinking about how I would build his miraculous body. And of course, I'd frame him up first. I'd create the substructure. So I'd put all his bones together with tendons and ligaments and muscles. And then I'd run all the utilities. I'd run his circulatory system and his lymphatic system and his nervous system. And then I'd install all of his organs, and I'd sheathe him. And then I'd fill him with blood, maybe some food and water, and I'd start him up. And it made me realize that although this is the linear way we think about and putting fragmented pieces together to make this Frankensteinian idea, that no living being, whether it's you or I or our communities or our rivers or our landscapes, built their structure in this way. Right? They were never built from outside, though everything I've made in my life, for the most part, I've designed it, I've put it together, and then I've started to operationalize it, even at this talk today, right? And his body and my body were made through carrying out the processes that they still carry out. He was metabolizing food using oxygen, and he was moving around, and he was having thought processes in all the 4 ways that Daniel is talking about, right? No one dug the river and then turned the tap on. It was the flowing of the water that created the river. And was lucky enough to live in a Pueblo community here, and it's one of the ways that they think about how the very architecture of the building of the village was created. It's this fluid, mud is put on, mud is washed off, buildings are added, and it is through the actual life of the village that the village is built, right? Which is not uncommon in the world in traditions that we need to remember. Yeah. And the other story I want to tell that this shows up all around the world in different forms. Stone soup is one of the ways we know it in Europe, right? Sometimes it's a stone, sometimes it's nails, sometimes it's buttons, but 3 strangers come into a village and everybody shuts their doors to them. And the village is fragmented. Everybody's scared of one another. As Manish was talking about, there's this scarcity idea. Everybody's hoarding their own. And so rather than receiving these strangers, and rather than the strangers accepting that they are outsiders, they be a part of the living community they want to see. They want to regenerate. So they go to the village center, fill their pot with water, start a fire, put some stones in there and start to boil it. A little child comes out. What are you doing? We're making stone soup. Oh, that would be good, right? Sometimes we don't have any food. It would be good to know how to make stone soup. Oh, do you have a bigger pot? She goes and gets a bigger pot, and they are making more stone soup, and people get interested. And oh, it'd be good if a little salt always makes soups taste good. Oh, I have some salt, right? Oh, maybe some onions. And so what they have done is they have created a vision in the minds of the people of what a reciprocally nourishing community would be like. And they each create that in their own inner minds, in their own mind's eye. And then they begin to see their role in that. Oh, I've got some turnips. I got some cabbages. Oh, I'll set up some tables. Oh, we'll play some music. Right? So they have seeded an idea that everyone creates in their own minds from their knowledge of that place. And they are then motivated to contribute what they have to contribute to regenerating that life of the community. And then they all experience it, and they welcome the strangers into their homes. Right? So there is no command and control. There is nobody designing it. There is nobody telling anybody what to do. It is all everybody seeing this unifying aim and seeing their role in it that they long to belong to, right? And that is how that community is regenerated and sees how its life could be reactivated from everybody doing it. So it's not a linear process at all. It has everything to do with being, and it's the choice of those strangers to not be strangers, to remember themselves into this community in a way that enables all the rest of the community to remember itself into the community, right? And it reminds me of my friend Brad Lancaster's work in Tucson, Arizona, where he's done all this tremendous work, excuse me, harvesting water, planting the water to grow urban forestry. But what he's really working on is regenerating the whole of the community, the human and other than human, right? And one of the stories he tells that I really love is that he cut the curbs, harvested the rainwater off the streets, unique ecosystems and unique climate there, right? It rains very hard when it does rain. And so the streets are full of water. So by making depressions adjacent to the street and catching that water, he was able to grow all these native plants that provide food and shade and shelter for humans and others. So he did this in front of his house. It was 20 degrees cooler than anywhere else. So everybody wanted to be there. So he said, why don't we do the whole block? So he got some money to get some plants to do it. And he got the community together and they worked together to do it. So he said the most important piece was that they did it themselves. Not only did they learn how to do it, but more importantly, they worked together. And in that way, they regenerated, they remembered themselves as a whole community. And they owned it. He said, even if the city had done it or landscapers had done it, if somebody cut a tree down or somebody parked their monster truck on top of the plants, grandma wouldn't be running out and protecting it because it was her daughter's, right? Or it was the neighbor's child's, right? That there was this reimagining, a seeing again of the life of the community and the value that that community, the plants and the animals and the water and all the rest were adding to the world, and everyone seeing their role within it. So those are a few things that I think are really important in everything I've heard today, is that not only are we a part of nature, we need to experience ourselves as an essential part of nature, right? We need to experience ourselves as an essential part of the community. And that's how we change these ideas of value that you're talking about. Your ideas of wealth is that we're noticing the wealth of being in a living community instead of the poverty of being shut off from one another. We're noticing the power that comes from us being together with the water, with the plants, with the shade, and with one another instead of the force of making things happen, right? And it's that potential vision that is organizing and orienting us, right? So it's even how embryology occurs, that there's the genetic makeup of each cell, but each cell looks to its context to see, oh, I'm a muscle cell, oh, I'm a muscle cell in the left ventricle, right? So there's this essential contextual piece that informs us about how our potential can be lived out and contribute to this larger potential. And I think that is the practice for me, is how do we stop trying to design and make things happen and notice that the practice is seeing a unique potential for each being and each place that can be elaborated by each member of that community so that each can find our own role in bringing that potential to fulfillment while we're working on fulfilling our own potential. And the thing I love about that stone soup example is that it's not a linear process. It's when they decide we are not strangers, we are members of this community, and we are creating this vision together. And that's, again, the opposite of scalability. It's this sort of nodal intervention. And I think the biggest nodal intervention is, am I a part of or am I apart from? And that's what they changed in everybody's mind, was they remembered that they were parts of this community and they were essential parts of this community. And I think that is the core of regenerative practice, is how do we create images, visions, where we see ourselves a part, essential and needed and necessary and treasured parts, aspects of this greater whole.
Okay. So, anybody would like to add to that from the panel? Or, I mean, what I was just wondering about the abundance thinking and this idea of being of service and the idea that you give and the universe gives you back, so this is this kind of like, a very different mindset to this idea of planning and investing, and then everything you get is then yours, and that's, as an economist, that's how I learned, that things had to be done as well. And it, I think, goes across the whole board in terms of the way we're educated from the beginning. And when you were talking about the Frankenstein, I was thinking, we have a lot of wonderful things from our history of everything that we did wrong to get here, but at the same time, we have, like, for example, the company called BlackRock and Vanguard, and the other one I was looking today, they own 22 trillion of assets, which basically is most of the companies of the S&P 500. It doesn't matter where you buy your supermarket food from, or which car you buy, or which brand. It's the same asset, it's asset managers that are collecting the profits from that. So I'm just thinking the way this Frankenstein has evolved is that very few people have access to this power and money of this hierarchical thing that we said started 5,000 years ago, and now it's become this global beast, and they're playing with each other, the territorial wars or whatever. But this way that you're describing things is so different to the way everything else is set up to work. And I feel that we are in a big transition point, to, I saw this happening when I got into environmental science, like you start about sustainability and suddenly corporate social responsibility, and everything gets diluted and gets sucked back into this same machine that just churns out the same thing out the other end. And now the same thing's happening with the word regenerative, and it happened with circular economy, and they converted it into this recycling business of basically sending the waste to the other side of the world to recycle it, and or whatever, and whatever you create that's truly authentic, you put it into this same machine, and the same sausages come out the other end, So how do we, and I think in the world of innovation, something I love about it is that we say that to create something new, you have to create another system, that makes the other one obsolete. So you have to really do this change of paradigm thinking, like Carol talks about. But also in Carol's exercise, she mentions about the ego, the dissolution of the ego, and this, well, you talked about ego versus echo. I think you need both things, but how do we collectively transform this ego to be of service of the whole, so it has its place, but its place is reduced, in the community, as you were saying, Joel, because the ego, when it has its place in the community, in the whole, then it has it's contained, but when you let it get on top of everybody else and start telling everybody what to do, and that happens in our homes, with what we talked about, the patriarchal model, or happens in our organization. So how do we dissolve all this? What is the next step? I would say, this is the question of, even the way we create organizations. Here we have this whole debate about SLs, the limited companies that they put the shareholders, and all they're looking for is to see how they're going to profit from this venture, how they're going to extract value, how they're going to put in their eventually offshore accounts or whatever, or accumulated for themselves. So with B Corp, we made some good progress, but now we're looking at how do you create these? I mean, these organizations you're talking about have nothing to do with B Corp. They have nothing to do with, these maybe steward-owned sociocracy, holocracy. I mean, there's all these other debates around how do we reorganize ourselves, create businesses, and start to generate value collectively and make a living out of this, because it's all nice sitting here and we all agree and we love each other. That's why we're here. And the question is, how do we make it practical and create an alternative system that can grow and be this bottom-up thing? How do we work together? How do we make this bottom-up thing spread and dismantle and make an alternative to what we currently have, which is so different? And sorry, I just add that I think there are two different operating systems. It's like you take an Apple proprietary system that you can't put any other software in unless it's Apple, and you're creating an open source, completely systemic thing here, and they're just not compatible. So how do you create this new operating system, and work from it?
Tyson Yunkaporta would say the problem is duality, right? And it's not that they're different operating systems, it's that they're providing different values, and that we have to figure out how to regenerate them all. So it's a piece of this thing of wealth. They all have a value. As you said, the system we've created has given us the ability to do what we're doing, right? And we all value that and have valued that. And if we see it as a problem, then we have to come up with a solution. And it's partly what Daniel is saying, is that the way you reconcile a duality is by letting a third force come in. And this is how humans have always reconciled things. So I want to give you two quick ones. One is, I have all this milk and I want to feed my children this milk, but it's going to spoil. And so currently what we would do is ultra pasteurize it, refrigerate it, package it. And what our intelligent ancestors did was we spoiled it into more nutritious, longer lasting foods like yogurt or camembert or what have you, right? And so every creative thing we have is a reconciler of duality. Another one that I love is, one of my favorites is the igloo, right? So it's really cold here, I want to live. It's really cold here, I want to live. Now we ship in prefab housing and oil, and what the intelligent Inuit did was they made an igloo. They made a house to protect them from the cold that the cold was necessary to create. Right? So how do we look at the value of everyone and everything instead of judging them and saying we need to create an alternative answer, as Manish was saying, right? That you end up creating a hydra, right? With many more heads growing out. And I think that is, we are not separate from those corporations. We are not separate from that economic system. We are not separate from the values that created that economic system. We're not separate from the cultural aspects that created that economic system. And by pointing fingers and blaming and creating problems, we cannot reconcile. We have to look at what is the value, what is the essential role that those companies are playing, and how would we regenerate that by seeing the system, the whole community that they are contributing to, so they could contribute in a different way. I don't think it's a matter of selflessness. We will never get there if it's about selflessness. It has to be, the deer is not being selfless. The oak is not being selfless. They are being themselves in a way that contributes to the whole of the system by giving who and what they are.
So we have 5 more minutes just to also ask some questions here from people who are here or from YouTube or from the streaming. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Daniel, Manish, Carol, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would like to add something. Sharam. So I live in India. I made a conscious decision to leave the United States 25 years ago in search of a way out of this mess that has been created. And what I kind of quote unquote discovered was that there are many other systems, other paradigms still living and still flourishing. And we have, I think the first thing I think I had to unlearn was this idea of Tina. There is no alternative, right? And that this whole monoculture of the mind privileges everything, but probably at least 4 or 5 billion people are living really outside of this paradigm still. What Daniel is referring to as seva, I was when he was talking, I was remembering, where I live in Rajasthan, it hits 50 degrees here every year, Celsius. So the only reason we stick around is for the mangoes. But the most sacred thing where I live is water, and it's reconnecting to that sense of sacredness, which I think is fundamental to all this work. I have seen women, very powerful women. They look very poor and backwards, but they're super powerful. Walk up to 2-3 kilometers to get water and to serve it in the spirit of seva to strangers for no money. It's the most, it totally messed with my Harvard educated mind. It's like, what's going on here? They could be making a ton of money off of this. What is this higher force that is guiding, this higher connection, this higher, what I would say is not selflessness, self-fullness, this self-connectionness, this deepest expansive self, which is allowing them to do this kind of seva in this heat, going and collecting water and serving it to absolute strangers who they don't know, for no money whatsoever, for no recognition whatsoever. So I think these are the kinds of, this is still living. It happens every year. It's just going to be starting. These are called piaos. They're on almost every corner of the city I live in. You'll find them. But still, when we have tourists coming from the West, they'll go to buy their bottled water, and they don't see these. These are almost, in the monoculture mind, these places have been rendered invisible, but they're living. They're all around us. So I think the invitation that I would offer, and what we've done is we have tried to say that, at least for me, the fundamentals problem starts with our education systems, and the realization that I had is that this system cannot be fixed. Those who are trying to fix it, good luck with you. But I think what we've tried to do is we're creating a network around the world of what we call ecoversities. There's the river ecoversities, the forest ecoversities, where the river or the forest or the mountains can be our gurus. We have favela ecoversities. We have jail ecoversities. We have grandmothers universities. So all kinds of spaces which have been made invisible by the modernist mindset, the monoculture mindset. They're living, they're alive, they're all around us. That this life is not a theoretical or abstract thing. And if we go back to what Carol is saying initially, if we go to place and context, we will start to reconnect to these things. But the questions of, sorry, Sharm, you're asking again are very abstract theoretical questions. So that's part where we're getting caught up, and then it becomes a mind game. But let us come back to place, and we'll start to see all around us life still coming through the cracks, coming in the shadows, coming to the places where you would least expect it. And that's what I think is what, and we can start to generate and rename. Like when in my place, I was told that, my grandmother is uneducated. But as I said, that this is again, or underdeveloped or whatever. These are the places where we can actually go and start to find something that is still very much alive and very much can guide us and as we move forward. Daniel, over to you.
You're muted, my friend.
Actually, I want to give my time to Carol if she has something to add at this point. I'll come in later if there's still time.
Well, I'm sorry I was here the whole time, but I get very tired and not feeling well. So I was, if you didn't have to look at me, I could relax more. But I really feel like, and I've come in the last few years, maybe my whole life, but I only see it now, realizing the way we develop and educate humans is the core. And if we don't create a whole different process, which is all education happens around something specific, but it's also about looking at the inner being and how that development work is so core. And I could hear that particularly in Manish stories. And also, Joel, I always loved you and have so much appreciation for your storytelling and teaching with storytelling. And I felt like, oh, there's a lot more of what has to happen, and it has to be a new epistemology, a new way of people learning, so it's not handed into them from the outside, but discovered from being able to read into life and the stories that come from it. So I've been greatly appreciative of this panel and the opportunity to listen to all of you. Thank you.
Maybe I'll add just one thing that helps to answer also what Sharam was saying, like how do we get from where we are to all of this? I think that's the wrong question. And what we were trying to point out is that it's all around us, and we just need the new epistemology that Carol just referred to is an ancient epistemology that we have to rediscover, that makes us part and participant of this living wholeness again. And if we understand that, then we can also relax into the big issue, the mortality of ourselves, our species, the system we live in. Like one of the ways that the system you're referring to, Sharam, that is so powerful and sucks everything in, is going to collapse, is because it is not aligned with life. It has never been aligned with life, and the planetary abundance and capacity to adapt has given it 5,000 years, maybe even 10,000 years, because it was only a privileged few of us who built this system. But the time is up. And Joanna Macy gives this beautiful framing of what to do in this moment of change. We need holding actions so the damage of the current system doesn't get any further. We need seeing the world with new eyes, and we need building new systems. We need to somehow do all three of them at the same time. Joanna likes to say we need to be midwives of the new and hospice workers of the old. And that's where I find sometimes in this whole conversation about is it sustainable, is it regenerative, if we have a bit more of the compassion of the hospice workers with those who are with intention trying to transform a system that is actually a card house that is already crumbling, we might actually help their learning. So for me, I tend to lead with, you want to talk about circular economy or sustainability, and then weave them into this more specific place-sourced way of seeing. And then it becomes a different conversation because we're all capable of that. So I really, really love this conversation, and thank you very much for making it possible. The beginning was a little bit blippy with the technology, but I think we pulled it around.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think I did the right question because you just answered it beautifully. So thank you for that, all of you. I think so. Thank you for being here. And as you said, time is up also here because we're going to just make some questions from the audience here and also from some people on the streaming. Please, anybody, and you can ask in Spanish if you prefer, and we translate it, or you can ask in English. Is there any? So while people warm up here, we can ask something on the
Empezamos
streaming.
con las preguntas
Yes,
online.
please,
Let's start with the online questions. Nietzsche, excuse me, I missed the second goddess. They were Lakshmi, Sakti, and
which is the third?
who is the
Shiva.
third goddess?
Saraswati.
Swati.
Saraswati. Saraswati.
Swati. Okay.
Saraswati.
Now, there's a second question. Don't you think that the teal management is very aligned with creating regenerative organizations?
Teal
management.
the teal organizations from reinventing organizations, is that in line with what we're trying to do in terms of creating businesses that do things differently?
Maybe to the little extent that people who use this integral framework and biodynamics, the teal perspective should be able to hold multiple ways of knowing and value the contributions of different angles on the complexity we're part of. But it tends to still be, even in the framing of management, there is a logical error that, to my mind, doesn't necessarily lead to regenerative practice.
Okay. Is there any other question? No? Is sociocracy similar to, in terms of creating these circles to self-manage, and how do people organize themselves? Or is there anybody here who would like to ask something? I'm just coming up with questions because I have it on my mind. But
first of all, thank you so much. That was a really interesting seminar. You guys spoke a lot about regenerative in the sense of, I think, culture and grand scheme of things in terms of your environment. If we brought it down into a smaller scale and talked about like a regenerative space, like something you can occupy on a day-by-day basis, what would that mean to either of you guys?
I think we've all spoken to the same things, right? Where we're talking about being present with what's around us, be present to the potential of where we are, not in these large out there places, and work on what is our own unique potential, what is the unique potential of the people and places that we live and work, instead of, as Carol kept saying, some generic idea about what would be better, right? Because that generic idea and even the idea of better is necessarily dualistic, right? That I can never be the best. Goes back to that competition thing, right? That if there's one king of the hill, as in feudalism, then we're all fighting for the same position. And that's the scarcity idea. But nobody can be a better me than me. Nobody can be a better oak tree than the oak tree. It's not in competition with the deer. They're filling different roles. And so I think seeing and remembering our place in the communities we're a part of is really where we start. Any other thoughts, my friends?
I would say, just to add to that, Joel, that spending as little time as possible in schools and universities, and we encourage people who want to do generative work to take at least 1 year gap year to start to really re-explore. It's very interesting. My own niece has been on a gap year after 12th this year, and she just gave a little presentation to us about her first 6 months, and it almost brought tears to my eyes. She said, "I used to hate this place, and this last 6 months, I've fallen in love with this place because I've met so many beautiful people and things I never knew existed because I was always busy with school and in the little bubbles created around school and the exams and the pressure and all of that." So I think actually making conscious choices, and we have been working specifically. One of the things that, how can you take a gap year with no money? So the beauty of all the things you can do without very much, because the people think, oh, it's very expensive and all of that. So I think that's the one starting point I would offer, at least very practically, is get out and get out of schools, get out of formal conferences, get on the streets, start meeting all kinds of people that are outside of your usual realm of relationships and connections.
Manish mentioned earlier that he's influenced by the Jain lineage, and one of my teachers that has been influencing me for over 20 years is Satish Kumar, and he took a gap year without any money and walked from India via Moscow and Paris to London, and then Bertrand Russell paid his ticket to go to New York, and then he walked from New York to Washington with Martin Luther King, and that's an education. The people he met, the trust that he had in walking into Pakistan at the beginning, like of an India-Pakistan conflict without any money and trusting that he would be met by human beings, by life wanting to create conditions conducive to life. And I think for me personally, on a very personal level, like I could have joined you in Madrid, but I didn't want to travel because my place is here in the Mediterranean on the Balearic Islands on Mallorca. And I've been trying really hard to engage with what Peter Berg first called the process of re-inhabitation, which is also related to what Joel was saying, remembering myself in my body, remembering myself in this land that I'm now the custodian of, listening to the conversation I can have with this land and how this land can inform me through my multiple ways of knowing. And exactly what Manish Niels was saying about is happening. You just fall in love with the details of place in a new way. And I think if we all did that, how could we fall in love with our places and our communities again? Then we would begin to hold a vision out of which regenerative practice will flourish.
I'd like to add something to what both of you are adding. My grandson was always, he's 23 now, who has always been a master student, always top of his class, but he was never in a public school. He was always in a unlearning or democratic kind of school where each kid decided what they wanted to learn and how. And yet he was driven from inside, mostly because both of his parents are super smart PhDs, and they gave him freedom. But he finally, that's the last year, quit the first job he had and decided to take a gap year at the end of his first job. And I think what you do during that year matters. He and I are meeting and reading through a series of spiritual books, and they're full of exercises. And I do the exercises as well as him. He picks the reading out of, uh, some are Krishnamurti, some are Gurdjieff, some are Tibetan books, and we sit and we talk about them, grandmother to grandchild. And I swear I am learning and having my own gap here by being with Max and doing this reading and no studying. We once in a while talk a little about what he might do when he enters the work world again and how he might do it. But I suggest grandparents join their children in the process, and I think it enriches it for both.
Carol, can you adopt us as your grandchildren too?
Well, I would because I learned so much from you today that I would love to do that. But unfortunately, I'm on my way out of this plane, so uh, wish you all well.
Much
Thank you
love.
very much. So I just have to say thank you so much for being here, and it's a very special time, I think, also because we had the wonderful opportunity for Carol to start and also to finish with this conversation, and have all this wisdom rounded up into what you all said. And I think that I personally feel very inspired to at least not ask the wrong questions and go somewhere and actually do something with my hands, and meet people, and and get out of the theoretical, no. So I think it's been very helpful, and I hope everybody else also can take something very inspiring and life changing. Hopefully, we can all start doing something differently from today. thank you very much. So I'd like to also thank again the organization for all this to make it possible. This is a beautiful regenerative building that we would love to host you, but this is our place, not yours. So, no, but it's a very beautiful building here in Madrid, and it's triple eco working that's organized, designed by Sat Architecture, who also have Distrito Natural, which is a incredible transformative architecture firm that's doing eco housing and communities, and we have this beautiful village community being developed in Avila, which is coming soon. Thanks to everybody here, and this is all part of getting our community going to start making places and doing things differently and working differently, and being different, no? Being ourselves again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.